August 15th, 1944, Camp Alva, Oklahoma. The cattle car door scraped open with a metallic shriek that cut through the suffocating prairie heat. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter stumbled onto the wooden platform, his Wehrmacht uniform hanging in tatters, his ribs visible through the coarse fabric. He had surrendered 3 weeks earlier in the hell of the Falaise Pocket, where American artillery had turned the Norman countryside into a moonscape of shattered steel and burning flesh. Now, blinking in the harsh Oklahoma sun, Klaus braced himself for what every German soldier had been told to expect from American captivity: starvation rations, brutal interrogation, perhaps a bullet to the back of the head when no one was watching. What Klaus Richter could not have known, as he shuffled toward the camp gates with 200 other captured Wehrmacht soldiers, was that he was about to witness the most psychologically devastating weapon in America's arsenal. Not the P-51 Mustang or the Sherman tank, but something far more insidious and overwhelming: the casual, almost careless abundance of American industrial might. This wasn't just about prisoner treatment. This was about the systematic demonstration of a civilization so wealthy, so productive, so incomprehensibly rich that it could afford to feed its enemies better than most nations fed their own soldiers. What Klaus was about to experience wasn't kindness, it was the cold mathematics of industrial dominance, served with ice cream and Coca-Cola. The contrast was not merely dramatic, it was existential. While German civilians were mixing sawdust with flour to make bread, while Luftwaffe pilots were flying missions on synthetic fuel made from coal, while Wehrmacht soldiers were wearing uniforms stitched from paper and eating turnip soup, America was feeding its prisoners of war with a casual extravagance that defied comprehension. This abundance would prove to be more than generous treatment. It would become a weapon that struck at the very heart of German morale, ideology, and will to fight. The numbers alone tell a story that contemporary German leadership desperately tried to suppress. By 1944, the average German civilian was surviving on 1,412 calories per day if they were lucky. A Wehrmacht soldier in the field received 2,300 calories daily, and this ration had been steadily decreasing since 1942. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht had calculated these figures down to the gram: 600 grams of bread, often adulterated with potato flour, 120 grams of meat, frequently horse meat or worse, and 20 grams of fat per day. These were starvation rations disguised as military efficiency. Meanwhile, in American POW camps, the daily caloric intake for German prisoners averaged 3,200 calories more than most American civilians consumed, and certainly more than any German had seen since before the war began. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was crushing, but the truly staggering revelation lay not in the quantity but in the quality and, most importantly, in what this abundance represented about American productive capacity. When Klaus Richter was handed his first American prisoner meal, he stared at it with the bewilderment of a man trying to solve an impossible equation. The aluminum tray itself a marvel. Since aluminum in Germany was so precious, it was reserved exclusively for aircraft production. Contained roast beef, mashed potatoes, swimming in butter, green beans, white bread with actual butter, not the ersatz margarine made from coal tar that Germans had been choking down, and for dessert, vanilla ice cream. Ice cream! In a prisoner of war camp, in the middle of Oklahoma, in August. Klaus later wrote to his brother, in a letter that would be intercepted and copied by German intelligence before reaching its destination: "They give us ice cream, Hans. Ice cream. Do you remember ice cream? I had forgotten it existed. The Americans make it for their prisoners. In the desert, while we fight for sugar beet scraps, they freeze cream and sugar for their enemies." The psychological impact was immediate and profound. But the ice cream was just the beginning. The Coca-Cola arrived 3 days later. To understand the weapon that Coca-Cola represented in 1944, one must understand what it symbolized to German eyes. This wasn't simply a beverage, it was liquid proof of American industrial supremacy. While German chemists were desperately trying to create synthetic substitutes for everything from rubber to coffee, America was mass-producing a luxury drink and distributing it to prisoner camps thousands of miles from any major city. The mathematics of Coca-Cola production in 1944 reveal the scope of American industrial might, the that German prisoners were witnessing firsthand. The Coca-Cola company was producing 1.6 billion servings annually, requiring 1.2 million tons of sugar, more sugar than the entire German civilian population had access to in a year. The company operated 963 bottling plants across the United States, each plant representing an industrial capacity that exceeded most German military production facilities. But what truly devastated German morale was not just the existence of Coca-Cola in their prison camps, but the casual, almost thoughtless way it was distributed. American guards didn't ration it, didn't treat it as precious, didn't make it a reward for good behavior. They simply handed it out like water. Feldwebel Ernst Zimmermann, captured at Cherbourg, wrote in his diary, "Today they gave us this American drink, Coca-Cola. The guards drink it like we used to drink water from a stream. They don't seem to realize what miracle they hold in their hands. Sugar, caramel, vanilla, carbonation. How do they carbonate millions of bottles? Where do they get so much sugar? Why do they waste it on prisoners? Are they so rich they cannot comprehend scarcity?" The questions that tormented Ernst were precisely the questions that American industrial planners wanted German prisoners to ask. This wasn't accidental generosity. This was psychological warfare conducted through abundance. The Coca-Cola distributed to German POWs was produced by the same industrial system that was simultaneously producing the materials for 96,000 aircraft, 64,000 tanks, 800,000 tons of artillery shells, and 2.6 million small arms annually. Every bottle of Coca-Cola was a demonstration of excess capacity, industrial might so overwhelming that America could afford to spend precious resources on luxury beverages for enemy soldiers, while outproducing the entire German war machine by a factor of 4-1. The contrast extended beyond food and drink into every aspect of camp life. The barracks where German prisoners slept were heated by a central system that consumed more coal in a single day than most German villages saw in a month. The electric lighting everywhere, burning through the night as if electricity cost nothing, reminded prisoners constantly of the industrial capacity that made such waste possible. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, a panzer officer captured during the Battle of the Bulge, observed in a letter that would later be studied by German intelligence, "The lights burn all night, Hans. Do you remember when we had electricity in the evenings? These Americans burn it like daylight. Their guards wear wool uniforms, real wool, not the synthetic fiber our quartermasters substitute. Their boots are leather, not cardboard. Their trucks deliver fresh food daily. Where do they get the fuel for such waste? How many oil wells do they possess?" The answer to Friedrich's questions would have horrified German leadership had they fully grasped it. In 1944, the United States was producing 4.7 million barrels of oil per day, more than the entire German war effort had consumed since 1939. American petroleum production exceeded German consumption by such a margin that the U.S. could afford to heat prisoner barracks, run refrigeration units for ice cream production, power bottling plants for luxury beverages, and still supply enough fuel for the largest military machine in human history. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating abundance was the most mundane: paper. German prisoners were given unlimited access to writing paper, books, newspapers, and magazines. This might seem like a minor comfort, but to men who came from a nation where paper was so scarce that newspapers were printed on 4 pages instead of 8, where books were no longer published unless they served direct military purposes, where personal letters were written on scraps salvaged from military dispatches, the casual availability of paper represented something profound. Unteroffizier Martin Becker wrote to his wife in Cologne, "They give us books, Greta. American books, translated German books, technical manuals, newspapers. I asked the guard why they waste so much paper on prisoners. He looked at me strangely and said, 'It's just paper. Just paper.' Do they not know that paper requires wood, pulp, bleaching agents, industrial machinery? Do they have so many forests that they can afford to educate their enemies?" The seemingly infinite supply of paper represented American resource abundance that German prisoners found incomprehensible. While German schools were closing because they lacked paper for textbooks, while German newspapers were rationed to 4 pages weekly, while German military communications were increasingly sent via radio to save paper, American POW camps were supplied with libraries that would have been considered luxurious by German university standards. This abundance extended to medical care in ways that left German prisoners questioning everything they had been told about American society and capabilities. The camp infirmary was stocked with medications that had vanished from German hospitals in 1943. Real morphine instead of synthetic substitutes, sulfur drugs that could actually cure infections, vitamins that prevented scurvy and beriberi, dental supplies that allowed for actual dental work rather than mere extraction. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer, was given permission to work in the camp infirmary. His reports, sent through Red Cross channels and later intercepted by German intelligence, painted a picture of medical abundance that German commanders found difficult to believe. They waste medical supplies with shocking carelessness. Bandages are changed daily, not because of infection but because fresh bandages are readily available. They use real morphine for minor procedures. They have X-ray machines. X-ray machines! In a prisoner camp in the middle of nowhere, they extract teeth and then replace them with artificial ones. For prisoners, they spend more on prisoner medical care than our field hospitals spend on our own wounded. The X-ray machines were particularly demoralizing. These devices required not just sophisticated manufacturing capability, but ongoing supplies of photographic plates, chemical developers, and electrical power. The casual presence of such equipment in a prisoner camp demonstrated industrial depth that German prisoners found deeply unsettling. But the abundance that most systematically destroyed German morale was recreational. The presence of musical instruments, radios, sporting equipment, and organized entertainment. German prisoners were provided with enough musical instruments to form full orchestras and bands. Not cheap instruments or captured equipment, but new American-manufactured instruments shipped directly to POW camps. The harmonic mathematics of abundance could be calculated. At Camp Alva alone, German prisoners had access to 23 violins, 8 cellos, 4 double basses, 16 clarinets, 12 trumpets, 6 trombones, 2 tubas, 3 pianos, and a complete drum set. The replacement strings, reeds, and sheet music arrived monthly. Gefreiter Otto Kleist, a former music teacher from Munich, wrote to his colleague, "They have given us instruments worth more than my annual teaching salary. Real instruments, not the cardboard and wire substitutes our children now use in school. They shipped these across an ocean, Carl. They manufactured them, shipped them across an ocean, and gave them to prisoners. What kind of nation has such wealth that it can afford to waste orchestras on its enemies?" The sporting equipment told the same overwhelming story. Baseball equipment, American footballs, soccer balls, tennis rackets, ping-pong tables, chess sets, playing cards, all manufactured specifically for prisoner recreation. The casual provision of recreational equipment demonstrated a productive capacity that German prisoners found impossible to reconcile with their understanding of wartime economics. The radios were perhaps the most psychologically devastating element of all. German prisoners were allowed to listen to American radio broadcasts, which meant they could hear American popular music, news, and advertisements. The advertisements were what broke them. American radio commercials in 1944 casually discussed consumer goods that had vanished from German society. New automobiles, household appliances, luxury foods, cosmetics, clothing. But more devastating than the products themselves were the implied production figures. A single radio advertisement for Chevrolet would mention thousands of new cars rolling off production lines daily, while German automobile production had been converted entirely to military vehicles in 1942. Obergefreiter Heinrich Schmidt, monitoring American radio broadcasts as part of his assigned duties, reported to his superiors, they advertise civilian goods during wartime. Not just essential items, but luxury goods. They speak of choosing between different brands of the same product. Choice. They have so much productive capacity that companies compete for civilian purchases while simultaneously outproducing our entire military industry. The psychological warfare conducted through abundance reached its peak during American holidays. German prisoners witnessed Thanksgiving celebrations in 1944 that featured food varieties and quantities that seemed like fantasy to men who had survived on turnip soup and ersatz coffee. The Thanksgiving meal at Camp Alva included roasted turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, stuffing, rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, and ice cream. The quantities were staggering: 850 pounds of turkey, 400 pounds of ham, 600 pounds of potatoes, 200 pounds of butter, for one meal, for prisoners. But what truly devastated German morale was not the quantity of food, but the casual nature of its preparation. American cooks didn't treat this feast as an extraordinary expense or miraculous achievement. They treated it as normal, expected, traditional. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, who had experienced the initial shock of American abundance 6 months earlier, wrote to his brother, "They call this a normal holiday meal, Hans. Normal. They serve this to prisoners, and act as if it costs nothing. The cook told me they prepare the same meal for American families across the entire continent. Millions of families, Hans. Millions of turkey dinners, simultaneously, while we celebrate with potato peels and synthetic meat." The Christmas celebration of 1944 demonstrated American abundance so overwhelming that German prisoners began to question not just American productive capacity, but the fundamental premises of German ideology. The contrast was existential. While German civilians were celebrating Christmas with wooden toys and ersatz everything, American POW camps featured Christmas trees, wrapped presents, special meals, and even Santa Claus costumes for entertainment. The presents were the breaking point for many German prisoners, not because they were elaborate or expensive, but because they existed at all. In Germany, Christmas gifts had been replaced by utility items or simply cancelled entirely. In American POW camps, prisoners received packages containing toiletries, candy, tobacco, writing materials, and small personal items. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber wrote, "They give presents to prisoners at Christmas. Real presents, wrapped in colored paper with ribbons. The paper alone would be worth a fortune in Berlin. The ribbons are silk. They waste silk on prisoner presents while our parachutes are made from cotton. What kind of productive capacity allows such waste?" The waste that Friedrich observed was actually the visible manifestation of American industrial efficiency, operating at scales that German planners had considered theoretically impossible. The silk ribbons on prisoner presents were produced by textile mills that simultaneously manufactured parachute cord, aircraft fabric, and military uniforms at production rates that exceeded German textile output by factors that German economists would have dismissed as propaganda if they hadn't witnessed the evidence firsthand. The casual abundance extended to personal hygiene supplies in ways that highlighted the depth of German material deprivation. German prisoners were provided with unlimited soap, shampoo, toothpaste, razor blades, and toilet paper. These weren't luxuries in American standards, they were basic necessities. But to German prisoners who had been using ersatz soap made from clay and artificial substitutes, who had been rationed to one razor blade per month, who had been using newspaper for toilet paper, the unlimited availability of genuine hygiene supplies represented industrial capacity beyond their comprehension. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann observed, "They provide real soap that actually produces lather, real toothpaste that contains real mint, razor blades sharp enough for multiple shaves. These are manufactured items requiring chemical processes, metal working, packaging, transportation. They produce enough for millions of people, including prisoners, while we cannot manufacture adequate soap for our own civilians." The mathematics of American soap production in 1944 revealed the industrial reality behind Dr. Hartmann's observations. Procter & Gamble alone was producing 400 million bars of soap annually, while simultaneously manufacturing military supplies. The company's production capacity exceeded the soap output of all German manufacturers combined, and this was just one American company among dozens producing similar quantities. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating abundance was the most subtle: the casual waste of energy. German prisoners observed electric lights burning continuously, heating systems running at comfortable temperatures, refrigeration units maintaining optimal food storage, washing machines and dryers operating constantly, vehicles running even for short distances. Energy consumption that German prisoners had been trained to see as criminal waste was treated as normal operating procedure in American POW camps. The casual use of electricity was particularly demoralizing. While German cities observed strict blackout protocols and rationed electricity to essential functions only, American POW camps were illuminated like peacetime cities. The waste seemed incomprehensible until prisoners began to understand the scale of American power generation. Obergefreiter Heinrich Schmidt attempted to calculate American electrical production based on his observations. If they can afford to burn lights constantly in prisoner camps, if they can run refrigeration units for ice cream production, if they can operate washing machines and heating systems without apparent concern for fuel consumption, then their electrical generation must exceed our entire national capacity by impossible margins. Heinrich's calculations, primitive though they were, approached accuracy. American electrical generation in 1944 totaled 271 billion kilowatt-hours, approximately 10 times German electrical production. This massive energy surplus allowed Americans to treat electricity as abundant rather than precious, to waste it on prisoner comfort rather than ration it for essential military production. The abundance extended to transportation in ways that revealed American logistical capabilities that German prisoners found strategically terrifying. Fresh food arrived daily by truck. Mail was delivered regularly. Prisoners were transported to work details, medical appointments, and recreational activities by vehicles that seemed to operate without fuel constraints. The trucks themselves represented American industrial abundance in its most visible form. German prisoners observed that American military vehicles were larger, more robust, and more numerous than German equivalents. But more disturbing than the superior quality was the apparent inexhaustibility of American motor vehicle production. Feldwebel Ernst Zimmermann counted vehicles during his months at Camp Alva. I have seen 347 different trucks visit this camp since my arrival. Different trucks. Not the same vehicles making repeated trips. They have enough trucks to assign specific vehicles to specific routes, enough fuel to run them continuously, enough spare parts to maintain them indefinitely. How many factories must they operate to produce such quantities? Ernst's question touched on the heart of American industrial superiority. In 1944, American truck production totaled 2.4 million units more trucks than Germany had produced in its entire automotive history. The casual abundance of vehicles at POW camps represented surplus capacity in an industrial system so massive that German planners had never conceived of comparable scales. But the abundance that most systematically broke German prisoner morale was informational. Access to news, books, magazines, and newspapers that revealed the true scope of American productive and military capability. German prisoners were allowed to read American newspapers and magazines, which meant they had access to information about American war production that German intelligence desperately wanted to suppress. The numbers published in routine American newspaper articles, production figures for aircraft, ships, tanks, ammunition revealed an industrial capacity that German leadership had dismissed as propaganda, but which prisoners could now verify through their daily observations of American abundance. Time magazine, available in camp libraries, published weekly production statistics that German prisoners found impossible to reconcile with their understanding of industrial capacity. Aircraft production figures of 8,000 units monthly, ship construction rates of 3 vessels daily, ammunition production measured in millions of rounds. These weren't classified military secrets, they were routine information published for American civilian consumption. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber wrote, "They publish their production statistics in magazines for prisoners to read. They treat military production figures as casual information rather than state secrets. Either these numbers are lies intended to demoralize us, or they represent productive capacity so overwhelming that they can afford to reveal it without fear." The casual revelation of American production statistics was indeed intended as psychological warfare. American military planners understood that German prisoners would communicate this information to their families and comrades, spreading knowledge of American industrial supremacy throughout German military and civilian populations. The abundance experienced in POW camps was meant to be reported, discussed, and compared with German wartime deprivation. The strategy was working. German letters home, monitored by both American and German intelligence, revealed the systematic destruction of German morale through witnessed abundance. Prisoners weren't just reporting good treatment, they were reporting industrial and social capabilities that challenged fundamental German assumptions about American society. Gefreiter Otto Kleist wrote to his family, "Everything they told us about American decadence and weakness was wrong. This is not a decadent society. This is a society so productive, so organized, so wealthy, that it can afford to be generous to its enemies. They are not soft, they are so strong they can afford to appear soft." The letters were having their intended effect on German civilian morale. Families who received reports of American abundance began to question official German propaganda about American military weakness and social decay. More importantly, they began to calculate the implications of American productive capacity for German military prospects. The psychological impact deepened during the winter of 1944–45, when German prisoners experienced American abundance against the backdrop of catastrophic German military defeats. As news of German reversals reached POW camps, the failure of the Battle of the Bulge, the collapse of German positions in the east, the advance of Allied armies into German territory, prisoners began to understand that the abundance they witnessed wasn't temporary generosity, but permanent capacity. The revelation that broke many German prisoners came through a casual conversation with an American guard. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, now 6 months into his captivity, asked his guard how long America could sustain such abundant provision for prisoners. The guard's response, recorded in Klaus's diary, delivered the psychological blow that American planners had intended. Sustain it? This isn't even trying hard. This is just normal peacetime production shifted to wartime purposes. We could feed 10 times as many prisoners without any strain on the system. This abundance isn't temporary, it's just how America operates. The mathematical implications of the guard's casual statement were devastating. If American abundance in POW camps represented normal productive capacity rather than maximum effort, then German military calculations had been based on completely false assumptions about American industrial potential. Klaus wrote, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We calculated their productive capacity based on our limitations, our scarcities, our industrial constraints. But they operate from abundance, not scarcity. They can afford to waste resources on prisoner comfort because waste, to them, is simply surplus capacity." The revelation spread through German prisoner populations with the force of a military defeat. Conversations in camp barracks increasingly focused not on military tactics or political ideology, but on the fundamental question of how German leadership had so completely misunderstood American capabilities. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, now working full-time in the camp medical facility, observed the psychological transformation of his fellow prisoners. "We are not just defeated soldiers recovering from wounds and exhaustion. We are men whose understanding of reality has been systematically demolished by witnessed abundance. We came here expecting American brutality and weakness. Instead, we found American generosity, backed by incomprehensible strength." The abundance continued through the spring of 1945, even as German military resistance collapsed entirely. German prisoners monitored radio broadcasts of Germany's surrender in May 1945 while eating ice cream and drinking Coca-Cola in American POW camps that maintained the same levels of abundant provision that had characterized their captivity from the beginning. The contrast was final and complete. German surrender was announced, while German prisoners experienced living standards superior to those they had known before the war began. But the most devastating abundance was yet to come, the abundance of mercy. As news of Nazi concentration camps reached American POW camps, German prisoners braced themselves for American retaliation. They expected reduced rations, harsher treatment, perhaps summary execution. They had been trained to expect retaliation in kind, and the evidence of Nazi atrocities seemed to demand American revenge. Instead, American abundance continued unchanged. The ice cream still arrived daily. The Coca-Cola was still distributed freely. The medical care remained superior to German military standards. The recreational facilities continued to operate normally. The absence of revenge became its own form of psychological warfare. German prisoners were forced to confront not just American industrial superiority, but American moral restraint, the ability to maintain abundant generosity, even in the face of evidence of German atrocities. Obergefreiter Heinrich Schmidt wrote in his diary, They know what we did. They know about the camps, the executions, the systematic murder, yet they still give us ice cream. They still provide medical care. They still treat us according to international law. This restraint is not weakness, it is strength so complete that they can afford mercy. The abundant mercy demonstrated a level of civilizational confidence that German prisoners found more demoralizing than any punishment would have been. Retaliation would have been understandable, even expected. Continued abundance in the face of revealed atrocities demonstrated a society so secure in its values and capabilities that even German war crimes could not provoke it to abandon its principles. The final abundance that completed the psychological destruction of German military ideology was the abundance of opportunity. As the war ended and repatriation began, German prisoners discovered that many American guards and administrators were offering them opportunities to remain in the United States, to bring their families to America, to participate in the abundant society they had witnessed firsthand. The offers weren't desperate attempts to recruit German expertise, they were casual invitations extended by a society so confident in its abundance that it could afford to welcome former enemies as potential citizens. America didn't need German technical knowledge or military experience. It was offering membership in abundance itself. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, facing repatriation to a devastated Germany in the autumn of 1945, wrote his final letter from Camp Alva. They offer us citizenship in abundance, Hans. Not just jobs or shelter, but participation in the society that produces ice cream for prisoners, that wastes electricity on enemy comfort, that manufactures Coca-Cola, while simultaneously outproducing the industrial capacity of entire nations. They are not just victorious, they are so abundant, they can afford to share victory itself. The offer of citizenship represented the ultimate abundance. The willingness to share American productive capacity with former enemies. This wasn't conquest in any traditional sense, it was assimilation through demonstrated superiority. Victory achieved, not through destruction but through overwhelming abundance. Many German prisoners accepted American offers of residency and eventual citizenship. Their decision represented not just individual choice, but recognition of a fundamental reality. They had witnessed a form of social and economic organization so superior to their previous experience that resistance became impossible, not through coercion but through attraction. The letters these men sent to their families in Germany completed the psychological warfare that had begun with ice cream and Coca-Cola in prisoner camps. They described not just American abundance but American possibility, the opportunity to participate in a society where scarcity was not the organizing principle of existence, where waste was evidence of surplus rather than criminal mismanagement, where abundance enabled generosity rather than hoarding. In the end, the story of German POWs and American abundance reveals the most profound weapon in America's arsenal during World War II, not superior firepower or better tactics, but the systematic demonstration of industrial and social superiority through casual, almost careless abundance. Ice cream and Coca-Cola in prisoner camps weren't gestures of kindness, they were demonstrations of power, so overwhelming that generosity became possible. Mercy became evidence of strength, and abundance became a weapon more devastating than any explosive device. The German prisoners who experienced American abundance returned to their devastated homeland carrying knowledge that would reshape German understanding of American society for generations. They had witnessed not just military defeat but civilizational superiority, the operation of a social system so productive, so organized, so confident that it could afford to treat its enemies better than most nations treated their own citizens. This abundance wasn't accidental or temporary. It was structural, systematic, permanent. It represented the mature operation of an industrial democracy that had solved the basic economic problems that continued to plague other nations. American abundance in POW camps was simply the visible manifestation of American abundance throughout the entire society. An abundance so vast, so reliable, so taken for granted that it could be extended even to enemy prisoners without constraint or calculation. The psychological impact of witnessed abundance extended far beyond individual German prisoners to influence post-war German political and social development. The generation of German leaders who rebuilt their nation after 1945 included men who had experienced American abundance firsthand, who understood American capabilities not through propaganda, but through personal experience, who recognized that future German prosperity required cooperation with rather than competition against American industrial and social systems. The ice cream and Coca-Cola served to German prisoners in American POW camps thus became more than symbols of American generosity. They became agents of historical transformation, weapons in a war fought not just between armies but between social systems, evidence in a trial where the verdict was delivered not through punishment but through the overwhelming demonstration of superior abundance. In this light, the casual abundance experienced by German POWs was revealed as perhaps the most sophisticated and effective psychological warfare in military history. Victory achieved not by breaking the enemy's will to fight, but by demonstrating a way of life so superior that continued resistance became not just futile, but incomprehensible. The war was won not when German armies surrendered, but when German prisoners chose America over Germany, abundance over scarcity, generosity over ideology. The mathematics of destruction had been loaded not in bombs or bullets, but in ice cream containers and Coca-Cola bottles, weapons of mass construction that built peace through demonstrated abundance, that conquered through generosity, that achieved victory through the simple but overwhelming power of having enough to share.